It is a horrible idea that there is somebody who owns us, who makes us, who supervises us, waking and sleeping, who knows our thoughts, who can convict us of thought crime, who can do thought crime, just for what we think. You're a child made in the image of God. Oh no, you're not. You're a faggot. And you can't join your church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful. It's inhuman.
Why do you feel the need to express your views so stridently when they're not always welcome? Isn't it rather like going around to playgrounds and telling children that Santa Claus isn't real?
In modern English vocabulary, it's more or less impossible to use the word atheist without preceding it with the adjective strident. They simply go together. I am not strident. I'm no more strident than anybody else. Now, is it like disillusioning children about Santa Claus? The weird thing is that children manage to grow out of Santa Claus, and for some reason...
Ask yourself, when you pick up the Bible, or the Hebrew Bible, or any holy book, and find ethical wisdom in there, what is that process like? I mean, you pick up Leviticus or Deuteronomy, and you find that if a woman is not a virgin on her wedding night, you're supposed to stone her to death on her father's doorstep. Okay, presumably you choose to reject that pearl of ancient wisdom. And then you find another line, I think this is also in Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. Or the golden rule, as preached in the New Testament. And this resonates with you as a good operating premise to generate further moral intuitions. If nothing else, it's a good ideal to live toward. Now, that process, the guarantor of your morality in that case is not the book. It's in your brain. And this kind of truth testing is something that we bring to religion. Now, religion does a lot of work on people, and you can get good people to believe some very terrible things in the name of God, and this is what worries me about religion. And I think we waste time talking about Stalin and Hitler and Pol Pot, frankly, because these were political religions. These were dogmatisms through and through, and when anyone started to make too much sense in opposition to these dogmatisms, they were carted off and killed. These were not contexts in which rational discourse prevailed and the best idea won. So to call them science is just to misuse the term. And it's, I mean, in the case of Hitler, it's just a total non sequitur, because Hitler never really repudiated Jesus, and he used Jesus in his speech, and he was facilitated by 1,000 years of religious fulminating against the Jews in the name of Christianity. I mean, this is, religion is implicated, certainly, in the Holocaust. So it's not, I think, a conversation worth having.
On the question of whether or not, why I find the question of God extraordinary, have I found it rare? Yeah, I've found it incredibly rare. I have yet to find a single example that I find reliable that demonstrates that a God actually exists, despite continued appeals to people to provide the evidence, and I was a fundamentalist Christian for 25 years, and many appeals on my own to God and then to other gods to present themselves or do something of that kind. I know that's not what we're talking about, but yes, I do find it an extraordinary claim. It ties in with something that John had said about his claim that the natural world plus the supernatural world is always going to be a better answer. Well, sure, it's magic. Magic solves everything. But until you demonstrate that anything supernatural has ever occurred, you cannot assert that it's a better explanation. In fact, it may detract from you finding an actual explanation, something that John seems to think that atheism is guilty of. His example of junk DNA, saying that, oh, we found this junk DNA. Well, guess what, John? It didn't halt science. Science kept going, and science found the flaws in those assumptions. So you're fear-mongering about the end of science as a result of scientists finding junk DNA is one that I just don't understand. But John said a couple of other things. One was that this idea of intelligence and reasoning and ability deserves an explanation. Those are his words. This is the appeal of religious claims and the appeal of claims about gods. Boy, it's really cool to have certainty. It's really cool to no longer have any questions and not be forced to say, I don't know. Sometimes when you say, I don't know, that's how you get to actually knowing. And those who assert that they know before it's justified are the ones that are halting this progress.
It is a dehumanizing, sadistic religion that this Christianity is. It turns me cold.
What do you have against God?
First,
Why does he bug you?
Well, first off, there isn't any, and second off, the idea which you invented has caused more misery to every human being in all ages of history than any other single idea.
Bratton also said that requiring schools to teach evolution is an absolute infringement on people's beliefs. Because, as I pointed out so many times before, that among religious extremists, truth is irrelevant. Whether you believe matters more than whether it is true. And all claims of religion fall into one of two categories. Not evidently true, and evidently not true. And those are your only two choices there. And Mr. Bratton admits that what he believes is not evidently true, and he knows it's not. Because he also said that what's being taught is just as much faith and, you know, just as much pulled out of the air as, say, any religion. If we have one advantage over the religious ideologues, other than the fact that we can prove that we're right, it is that they are so dumb, they don't know how dumb they are.
Maybe I will take a few minutes just to say something that I find repulsive about especially monotheistic, messianic religion. With a large part of itself, it quite clearly wants us all to die. It wants this world to come to an end. You can tell the yearning for things to be over whenever you read any of its real texts or listen to any of its real, authentic spokesmen, not the sort of the pathetic apologists who sometimes masquerade for it. Those who talk, there was a famous spokesman for this in Virginia until recently, about the rapture, say that those of us who have chosen rightly will be gathered to the arms of Jesus, leaving all of the rest of you behind. If we're in a car, it's your lookout. That car won't have a driver anymore. If we're a pilot, that's your lookout. That plane will crash. We will be with Jesus, and the rest of you can go straight to hell. The eschatological element that is inseparable from Christianity. If you don't believe that there is to be an apocalypse, there is going to be an end, a separation of the sheep and the goats, a condemnation, a final one, then you're not really a believer. And the contempt for the things of this world shows through all of them. It's well put in an old rhyme from an English exclusive brethren sect. It says that we are the pure and chosen few, and all the rest are damned. There's room enough in hell for you. We don't want heaven crammed. You can tell it when you see the extreme Muslims talk. They cannot wait. They cannot wait for death and destruction to overtake and overwhelm the world. They can't wait for what I would call, without ambiguity, a final solution. When you look at the Israeli settlers, paid for often by American tax dollars, deciding that if they can steal enough land from other people and get all the Jews into the promised land and all the non-Jews out of it, then finally the Jewish people will be worthy of the return of the Messiah. And there are Christians in this country who consider it their job to help this happen so that Armageddon can occur, so that the painful business of living as humans and studying civilization and trying to acquire learning and knowledge and health and medicine and to push back, can all be scrapped, and the cult of death can take over. That, to me, is a hideous thing in eschatological terms, in end times terms, on its own. A hateful idea, a hateful practice, and a hateful theory, but very much to be opposed in our daily lives, where there are people who sincerely mean it, who want to ruin the good relations that could exist between different peoples, nations, races, countries, tribes, ethnicities, who openly say they love death more than we love life, and who are betting that with God on their side, they're right about that. So when I say, as the subtitle of my book, that I think religion poisons everything, I'm not just doing what publishers like and coming up with a provocative subtitle. I mean to say it infects us in our most basic integrity. It says we can't be moral without Big Brother, without a totalitarian permission. It means we can't be good to one another. It means we can't think without this. We must be afraid. We must also be forced to love someone who we fear. The essence of sadomasochism. The essence of abjection. The essence of the master-slave relationship. And that knows that death is coming and can't wait to bring it on. I say this is evil. And though I do some nights stay home, I enjoy more the nights when I go out and fight against this ultimate wickedness and ultimate stupidity. Thank you.
You're going to spend your whole life preparing to meet the Lord. Boy, you folks are crazy as hell.
They were ticked off that I kept saying, I don't know. They have this mindset that programmed them as to what to expect in this debate. We're claiming God exists and God did it and this is the answer. And you're here to say that that's false and there's some other answer. And if ever they asked things like, do you have an explanation for consciousness? No? You don't? Well, tell me how this happened. I don't know. I'm not convinced any of us know. You're the one claiming to have an answer. Would you like to provide the evidence and the argument to support your actual answer? And if I find it compelling, then I'll agree with you. But my lack of an answer doesn't make your answer correct. This is the mindset of the creationists that go through and try to poke holes in evolution. And even if they poked holes so much that evolution ceased to be a concrete theory, they're not one step closer to proving creationism is true. And man, they got mad. By the third night, I think, Israel, the gentleman I was debating, said, well, every time we ask Matt a question, he just says, I don't know, which is a bit of an exaggeration because there were a lot of things that I did provide my answers for. And the main preacher came up to me at one point and said, doesn't it bother you? Doesn't it bother? Are you happy going to your grave not knowing the answers to these questions? No, I'm not. None of us are. We are all uncomfortable with this idea of not knowing. And that's why we have science. That's why we go out and try to find what the actual damned answer is. It's not that I'm comfortable not knowing, it's that I'm more uncomfortable pretending that I know.
That we need to cease to reward people for pretending to know things they do not know. And the only area of discourse where we do this is on the subject of God.
Let me ask you.
And I want to point out once again that evolution is a matter of verifiable fact requiring absolutely no faith whatsoever because it is indicated exclusively, exhaustively, and unanimously by all the available evidence from every relevant field of study and is contested by nothing. But this isn't about what Rick Bratton doesn't know about science. It's about what he does know about religion. Because this creationist just admitted that any religion, including his own, was pulled out of the air. And if you're not familiar with that, it is an American colloquialism referring to something that was made up, imagined out of nothing, fabricated, a tall tale with no basis in actual fact, but asserted as though it were true. In other words, a lie. I can only assume that he understands what he said and what it means, in which case this is quite an admission for someone intent on defending the faith and denying a proper, actual, factual education to other people's children. And this is what we can expect from the policies of the religious right. Ignorance, deception, misleading children, and defrauding little old ladies in an attempt to preserve a preferred belief even when they accidentally, occasionally, absent-mindedly admit that they know it's not really true.
I'm offended by chewing gum. I'm offended by backwards-pointing baseball hats. But I don't try to get a version of the blasphemy law passed to prevent people chewing gum or reversing their cap. So what if I'm offended? So what if my feelings are hurt? Does that give me the right to prevent others from expressing their opinions? However, is there a time when it is right to be offended? I think so, yes. We should be offended when children are denied a proper education. We should be offended when children are told they will spend eternity in hell. We should be offended when medical science, for example, stem cell research, is compromised by... Compromised, I should say, by the bigoted opinions of powerful and, above all, well-financed ignoramuses.
I want to ask Miss O'Hara, what is she going to do with Jesus, who is to return to earth?
Yeah, when Jesus comes back, you mean?
What is she going to do with Jesus?
Oh, I'm sorry, but I think you're just as funny as can be. Now, if a little green man with purple horns would knock on my door and say, I'm from Mars and I just descended, I'd believe him. But a shaft of light coming down and Jesus Christ digging up all these old dead bodies and resurrecting them when we're overpopulated already, this just leaves me cold. You know what, first off, I wouldn't do anything because it's never going to happen.
My question is to Christopher is, how you can justify wanting to take something away from people, from 95, that gives meaning to 95% of the American people, and replace it with something that gives meaning to just 5% of the American people?
Well, what an incredibly stupid question. First, I've said repeatedly that this stuff cannot be taken away from people. It is their favorite toy, and it will remain so, as Freud said in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys. Don't bring the toys to my house. Don't say my children must play with these toys. Don't say my toys might be a condom. Here we go again. Are not allowed by their toys. I'm not going to have any of that. Enough with clerical and religious bullying and intimidation. Is that finally clear? Have I got that across? Thank you.
I want to tell you something that I actually just read right before here, and it's in Poland today or yesterday, a 12-year-old schoolgirl by the name of Maria Kislow was discovered hanging in her room by her mother when she went to read her a bedtime story. And her daughter had left a note that said, "Dear Mom, please don't be sad. I just miss Daddy so much. I want to see him again." Her dad had died in 2009. This 12-year-old girl took her own life sometime this past few days so that she could go to heaven to be with her daddy again. And what the mother said almost killed me if my heart hadn't already been partially broken. Her mother said, "This is so unbearable. If it weren't for the fact that my son was here, I would stop living right now too." Not all religion is the same. We don't want to paint religions with a broad brush. And I'm sure Jason and I have a conversation about religion and evolution, or religion and science, and how much in conflict they are. And we'd have to pause at the very beginning to say, what do we mean by religion? Because religion isn't this monogamous thing, or homogeneous thing. Ah, there we go. Use the right word, dumbass. It's, we can't paint with a massively broad brush. But that little girl is one of the reasons that I do what I do. That's one of the reasons why I think other people are wanting to get more involved. It's one of the reasons why I think we've seen so much, our numbers increase so much in the secular movement, and people wanting to get involved in arguing. So go ahead, argue. She can come up here. Go ahead, argue. Get in conversations, be outspoken, avoid, please, please, please avoid the overreaching positions that shift the burden of proof, making broad claims like, well, Jesus never existed. Might be true, might not be. It's not necessarily the best place to start, but there's no reason to go there. Don't run when they're not chasing you. Don't shift the burden of proof. Let them try to do it so that you can point out that they've done it. Oh, God's an invented fiction, and here's these various biblical interpretations and views that almost nobody holds, but I'm going to argue against them anyway. Ask the person what they believe and why. Get to know them. Engage. Be skeptical. Be reasonable. Have confidence in yourself, but doubt everything you believe. And question everything. Be compassionate. We were all worth it. Be honest. You don't know everything. You're not me. And I don't know everything. Be caring towards people, which doesn't mean that you cannot be ruthless and relentless in attacking their positions, as long as you do it honestly and surgically, and are clear that on many occasions I have violated this rule. On the show I have said you're a moron. And what I mean by that is, in this situation, on this subject, you are being moronic. And I don't look at it as an attack on that person's entire character. I realize they do, which is why I'm adding this little caveat and cautioning others. I realize that they do. My thing is, we're all morons about something at some point. And it's a shorthand for me to say, oh, you're being a moron, or you are a moron. And I'm trying to change some of that without getting any softer, because religions, by and large, at least the versions that I tend to speak out about, are vile and disgusting and harmful and poisoning the universe in which we live. And I will never, ever try to play nice about the actual ideas and the harm they do, because that 12-year-old girl didn't need to die. Ridiculous ideas are by definition deserving of ridicule. Some people will take it personally. There's not always something you can do about that and still make the point, because some of those people are offended that you and I even exist, or that we won't sit quietly in the corner with our damn mouth shut. How dare you?
Why do mountains exist? There are some questions which simply don't deserve an answer. I mean, the question, why do mountains exist? You can give an answer in terms of the geological processes that give rise to mountains, but that's not what you want, is it? You want something about the purpose of mountains. What is the purpose of a mountain? It's a silly question. Doesn't deserve an answer. The mere fact that you can ask a question, the mere fact that you can frame a question in the English language, doesn't mean that it's entitled to an answer. If I say to you, what is the color of jealousy? It's a perfectly grammatical English sentence, but it's not a question that deserves an answer. The correct answer is, don't ask such a silly question.
But is it not part of the human condition to ask these questions?
It may well be part of the human condition to ask silly questions, yes.
The average lifespan for women in Afghanistan is 44 years. Okay, they have a literacy rate of 12%. They have almost the highest fertility rate in the world and almost the highest infant and maternal mortality in the world. This is one of the best places on earth to watch women and infants die. They also have a GDP that's lower than the world average in the year 1820. So it seems to me patently obvious that the optimal response to this situation, which is to say the most moral response, is not to throw battery acid in the faces of little girls for the crime of learning to read. Now, I think this is common sense to everyone in this room, and common sense it should be to everyone in the civilized world, except if you happen to be a bioethicist working on the President's Council at the moment. But this is also of necessity a claim about biology and psychology and sociology and economics. It is not unscientific to say that the Taliban are wrong about morality. In fact, we have to say this the moment we admit we know anything at all about human well-being.
And for the same reason, I think it's funny when any Christian organization pretends to be about family values, because Jesus did not value families. Jesus said, "Do not think that I've come to bring peace on earth. I came not to bring peace, but a sword. For I came to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. He who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves mother or father more than me is not worthy of me." He also said that whoever comes to me and does not hate his mother and his father and his sisters and his brothers and his children and his wife and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. So maybe it's not surprising that all these Christian organizations with the word family in their name are really hate groups. I know some Fox News followers who imagine that allowing for gay rights will somehow cost them religious liberty. So I asked a few of them, face to face, what difference does it make to you if a gay couple gets married? How does that infringe your rights in any way at all, or impact you at all? And the answer was, in essence, that gay marriage is a threat to the free expression of religion because Christians feel oppressed when they're not allowed to oppress other people.
Would it not then be an irrational leap of faith, which atheists themselves so harshly condemn, for an atheist to decide between right and wrong?
Absolute morality, the absolute morality that a religious person might profess would include what? Stoning people for adultery? Death for apostasy? Punishment for breaking the Sabbath? These are all things which are religiously based absolute moralities. I don't think I want an absolute morality. I think I want a morality that is thought out, reasoned, argued, discussed, and based upon, could almost say, intelligent design.
Let's say that the consensus is that our species, we being the higher primates, Homo sapiens, has been on the planet for at least 100,000 years. In order to be a Christian, you have to believe that for 98,000 years, our species suffered and died, most of its children dying in childbirth, most other people having a life expectancy of about 25, dying of their teeth, famine, struggle, bitterness, war, suffering, misery, all of that. For 98,000 years, heaven watches it with complete indifference. And then 2,000 years ago thinks, that's enough of that. It's time to intervene. The best way to do this would be by condemning someone to a human sacrifice somewhere in the less literate parts of the Middle East. Let's appeal to the Chinese, for example, where people can read and study evidence and have a civilization. Let's go to the desert and have another revelation there. This is nonsense. It can't be believed by...
And it's a war. It's a war in which we need to reach the mass of people with the sophisticated instruments of mass communication and with some ideas, not in little groups such as this, nor through little unintelligible magazines or through irrelevant issues. as we strive to be identified as everything that we can be identified as except an atheist. Well, I'm an atheist, and take a goddamn good look. 180 pounds on the hoof, and I'm proud of it. And as an atheist, I have an understanding that many of you do not have. I cannot take on all of the problems of the entire world piecemeal, the superstructure of our culture, for I have a more important job than that. I work only on the basic philosophy, the floor on which everything else sits. And in a geopolitical sense, and in a long-range view of 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years in the stream of human history from this date forward, that's the important thing. That floor, that base.